The name ChangeNotifierProvider itself is a combination of ChangeNotifier and provider. So let's summarize what the ChangeNotifierProvider does. First, it creates the instance of ChangeNotifier. Second, it provides an easy way to access ChangeNotifier for widgets that need it, and reveals the UI when necessary. These are the two things. But if you break this down a bit more, creating the instance of ChangeNotifier means, first, an instance of ChangeNotifier is created when necessary. This option can be overridden. Second, ChangeNotifier is removed from memory and it is no longer needed. Providing an easy way to access the ChangeNotifier for widgets that need it means, first, you can easily access an instance of ChangeNotifier through provider of without having to pass the instance through a constructor. Second, there are two ways to access a type T instance through provider.ob. Through provider.opt context, you can listen for changes in the type T's ChangeNotify instance. And if there is a change, you can reveal the UI. And through provider.opt context listen false, it only accesses the instance and does not listen for changes. Creating two types of provider.opt is a reasonable choice. This is because there are cases where only the instance of ChangeNotify is needed, and it is not necessary to reveal the UI, even if the data of the instance changes. We saw an example of the button earlier. Through this, a ChangeNotifierProvider enables dependency injection, meaning widgets that require data can easily access data. And when data changes, the UI can be rebuilt according to the data change. In other words, it enables state management, the synchronization of the data and UI. However, as you can see, it does not suggest any specific method for state management. The example we are going to cover this time isn't very different from the Provider Overview 03 app. But let's create a new app to test the ChangeNotifierProvider. Let's start by creating an app called Provider Overview 04 and copying all the contents of Provider Overview 03. And there is no need to modify the doc model, and you will delete the print. Let's go to main and wrap the material app with the doc type ChangeNotifierProvider. And in create callback, we'll create a doc instance where the name is doc04 and breed is breed04. This will give you access to the doc instance from all widgets under the material app, as well as reveal the UI when age changes. Change the title to Provider04. Since the doc instance is created in ChangeNotifierProvider, delete this line. The init state, doc listener, and disposer functions are also no longer needed, so we will delete them. Change the title of appbar to Provider04 as well. Since we access the doc instance through ChangeNotifierProvider, modify doc.name to provider.of doc context.name. Since we can access the doc instance through the provider, we no longer need to pass the doc instance through the constructor. Since there is no need to receive the doc instance through the constructor, delete the doc variable and modify the constructor. Because we access the doc instance through ChangeNotifierProvider, change doc.breed to provider.of doc context.breed. Since we can access the doc instance through the provider, we no longer need to pass the doc instance through the constructor. Since there is no need to receive the doc instance through the constructor, delete the doc variable and modify the constructor. Because we access the doc instance through ChangeNotifierProvider, change doc.age to provider.of doc context.age. Assign provider.of doc context with the listen option false to unpress the callback of elevated button. Let's do a hard restart and run it. Now, when I tap the grow button, the number increases, and the increased number is reflected in the UI. But here, name and breed do not change. It doesn't seem necessary to listen to them. Let's give listen false option. Let's run it again after a hard restart. Even if we do that, it runs fine without any issue. Originally, an error was displayed when the listen false option was given in the build, but this error message has been removed in version 4.3.3. The author still doesn't recommend this, but if you know what you are doing and use it, there is no need to stop using it. However, if you use it for performance optimization, you should use context.select, which is one of the extension methods that we will see later. But as we saw before, what if we remove the listen false option on the elevated button? After clearing the listen false option and performing hard restart, we will press the button. If you look at the debug console, the error message you saw earlier was displayed again. So in this case, the listen false option is still required. I will put the source code back to its original state. Now that we have learned about ChangeNotifier and ChangeNotifierProvider, let's look at the extension method of provider.